we are, guys, working on a different model. Going to be a bit of a change. I'm on a bit of a timeline. Don't even know if this is going to work out or not. Long story short, I have Airshow London is coming up in about a month, and it was just announced that the 173rd Fighter Squadron from Oregon will be bringing their F-15s down to London, and they're going to have a Eagle's Nest. A couple of F-16s. It'll be the 173rd from Oregon, like I mentioned. The Bayou Militia are bringing up some of theirs. The Louisiana Air National Guard will be bringing up a couple of their F-15s, and Mountain Home F-15Es will also be there. I realized not too long after that announcement was made that I have decals for the full color NATO, or no, sorry, the full color, I believe it's a 50th anniversary scheme for the 173rd. I'll throw a picture up here of what that scheme is. And it's one of those model decals, you know, the decals became available. They looked cool. I bought them. I had an old F-15 kit. This was actually built by a buddy of mine in high school. So this probably got built around, I want to say 2000 or 2001. He never really got into the whole model building scene, other than the fact that he liked airplanes, I liked airplanes. I built models. He kind of got into it a little bit because of that. But he never really went down the line of like really getting into it. It was just a little thing he did on the side. So most of the models he bought were, you know, cheap. Well, I should say cheap, but buy them at Michael's. You know, he went and bought those little art craft or whatever, water-based art paint that you can pick up at Michael's, you know, for like $1.99 a bottle for a little thing of water-based paint. So like, you know, colors weren't FSS matched or anything like that. He just had fun. He built what he liked. He didn't really care about cleaning up seams or matching paint perfectly or gloss coat or flat coat or anything like that. He just built for fun. And he had them for years, just hanging in his room doing whatever. Eventually, he outgrew them. Most people do. I'm one of the few that haven't. Anyways, he outgrew the models, and he sold me effectively a whole box of models for like 40 or 50 bucks. And it had a pretty good selection of models in them. One of them being this F-15C that I'm currently working on. But he had a few other things. He had some, it was a 1/48 scale B1, which was probably the highlight of the collection, which I had grand plans to eventually build up and hang. Just realized, you know, it's big. I don't have the space. I have enough other models to work on, and how the idea of having to strip the paint off an entire B1 model was just a bridge too far. Anyways, I ended up selling that to somebody over the internet. Ended up making enough money off the sale of just that B1 kit. He got a great deal on it. But I ended up, that model I sold for way more than what I paid for his entire collection of models. So the collection has paid for itself and then some. But what that effectively means is, I'm kind of rambling here because I'm talking and thinking at the same time and working. I have these kits. They're all painted in this paint. The accuracy is questionable. They need a little bit of work to get them up to a modern display standard. And the airplanes are going to be this unit, the 173rd from Oregon, bringing their F-15s. And I have decals for their 50th anniversary show build. So I reached out to the organizing group that does Airshow London and basically said, hey, I see they're bringing down these planes. Are they bringing the full color bird? Do they plan to bring the full color bird? I don't know yet. But I've decided, one way or the other, I'm going to paint this up in that 50th anniversary 173rd Fighter Squadron scheme, and I'm going to bring it with me to London. It might go somewhere, it might go nowhere, but I'm going to try. And like I said, I reached out to the organizing committee and I basically told them, look, I have an F-15 model, I have decals, are they bringing this bird down? Would you be interested if I can get this finished in time? For me to bring it down, have it signed by the crew, possibly having pictures taken beside the plane if it is that one that comes down. And then I would donate it or give it to the Airshow London organizing group, management team, whatever you want to call it, and they can have it displayed in their offices. Or, I'm not going to name names, but the person I know on the committee, you know, he can take it home for all I care, to be honest, and he can display it at his home. I really don't have the space for it. I have way too many models as it is. I like cool schemes, so I bought the decals for cool schemes. Cool, I don't even know what I just said, school schemes? Anyways, cool schemes. But it's one of those, like, am I ever going to build it? I have way more decals than I have models. I have way more models than I have time or space to ever finish and display. So if I can do one up and give it to somebody or an organization that could have use for it, why wouldn't I? So that's what I'm doing. Now I have already attempted to do this with Easy Off oven cleaner. That's my usual go-to paint stripper. Sprayed it, I let it sit for a while, came back, hit it with a toothbrush, and nothing happened. Absolutely nothing happened. And just on a whim, I grabbed an alcohol swab to see if I could get the decals at least to lift off the paint, because they weren't even affected by Easy Off. They usually aren't. Usually it'll pull the paint off from below the decal, and the decal will come off with the paint. But the Easy Off doesn't usually affect the decal in and of itself. Anyways, I'm like, hey, can I at least get the decals off with some alcohol and put me in a better place when it comes to trying to get this paint off with whatever. My dad has had luck with Spray 9. He says apparently that does a good job at pulling paint off. So I thought, well, maybe I'll get the decals off and I'll take it over to his place one day, or I'll just go buy some Spray 9 and give it a shot. Well, lo and behold, the alcohol swab took the paint off. And that's when I realized that's probably a water-based paint, and obviously Easy Off won't help with water-based paint, but alcohol will. So here I am, currently wiping this model down with some 70% isopropyl alcohol. It'll need a good rinse in some water after, just to clean everything up. But that's, you know, there's the nose. I think with a bit of sanding and some puttying, I got to clean up, you can see here, white glue in this seam. I got to clean up all of this seam. There's enough cleanup that needs to be done with this, that with a bit of sanding and some puttying and all that other stuff, the rest of this paint I'll probably be able to get off. Enough that I can go ahead and sand it as needed to and repaint and mask. as I've mentioned before, I'm going to try to keep the pace on this relatively quick. So I'm also, that for the most part is going to count towards the editing portion of this video as well. So I'm not going to be doing any voiceover. I'm not going to be doing any real editing. I'm just going to be throwing all these videos together in chronological order and making a video. So I'm going to be doing a lot of my talking like this as I'm doing work. And as you can see, I have the vast majority of the paint stripped off both the nose section and the fuselage section. I'm now going to be going through and trying to clean up a little bit of it. Some of the seams, like I said, the guy who built it, he never really cared about, like I said, accuracy or fill seam or anything like that. He just built models for the joy of having, you know, an airplane on his shelf. Which, I mean, it's not to knock him, because it's a perfectly valid. Sorry, just got interrupted there. As I was saying, I don't want to knock him, because I mean, building a model just for the joy of having an airplane built and not necessarily caring about seams or color accuracy or anything is a perfectly valid way of building. I mean, you build for what you want, not for what someone else wants, unless you're building for someone else. But anyways, so yeah, no, that's just how he built. He just wanted to have a model built, and he did it, and he had it on the shelf, and he hung it up, and he liked it, and that was it. So, you know, more power to him for building it. But I'm going to try to clean things up, and it's a little harder when you're after the fact. I don't get that ability to go through and line up seams and, you know, carefully paint things to try to keep gaps to a minimum. It's past that point now. So now I have to do cleanup. Now it's an after the fact attempt to make it look as good as I can make it. So it's not going to be perfect, but it will be better than it was. I'm hoping it'll be good enough to display. As usual, I'm just going to keep plugging along on this, waiting for some of this putty. I'm just kind of cleaning up some of these edges that I know need to be cleaned up. I'll deal with some of the things back here a little later. The gaps in here, gaps here, gaps in here, all that needs to be sanded down a little bit. I'm going to try to clean up, maybe not this seam so much. Around here, I definitely want to clean up a little bit. I'm not going to do a lot of puttying because there should be gaps there. I just want to knock down some of the high spots and try to blend it a little bit. So I'm getting very close. I'm hoping by tomorrow even I might be able to get a layer of primer down on some parts of this. I'm going to prime the two sections separately and then glue them together at the end. This seam sometimes can be a little fragile, and I don't want to be putting a lot of pressure back here somewhere and snap the fuselage again. So I'm going to get all of this stuff cleaned up, and then later on I will go ahead and glue them together. So the thing I'm going to do now is start to cover up these gear doors, or make gear doors, I guess is a better way of saying it. So I'm just going to slowly start with a square like that. Alright, you can see it basically lines up on all the corners, and then I'm going to go ahead and start marking where I need to cut. So I know, for example, that I'm going to need to cut, if that's lined up about there, my edge is going to be about there, and then I want to cut a straight line from here to here. I'm going to put a little mark on here so I remember which way it goes, so I don't end up getting myself backwards or upside down as I go. So now that should fit quite nicely. Quite nicely in that hole, just like that. Perfect. So my next step is going to be marking this edge. Now this one's going to be a bit difficult because it's going to, if it marks like that, it's going to go all the way out to effectively there. It might be off by a little bit. Luckily, a bit of super glue and some putty down the road will solve a lot of problems. That should be more than enough to get this started. Yeah, I'm off by a little bit, but like I said, it'll clean up at the end. I need to put a bit of a bend into this. Something like that. Yeah, see, I'm clearly going to be off by quite a bit. So let's focus on, first of all, I need to get some more of this piece out. There we go. Just pop the whole thing right out. Problem solved. Okay. Now, I'm going to focus on this back side, and I'm going to get this door to bend roughly where I want it to. I'm off by a little bit. Something like that, maybe. Let's see. Yeah, I like that. So then let's mark down here somewhere. Probably about there. I'll cut that straight across. That works. So now what I need to do is remark this point right there, and then cut that straight across to that, and that should be very close to the shape I need to fill this in, which I'm happy with. So I'm just going to goop it up with some of the thick glue. Get this sucker glued in place. Actually, you know what? Before I do that, I'm going to just scrape a little bit, make sure I have a nice clean-ish, air quotes clean, plastic to glue to. The way this glue works, you have to be plastic on plastic, so if there's any paint or epoxy, it looks like he may have used some sort of an epoxy when he glued this together. It doesn't look like model glue. So you do want it to be as close to plastic on plastic as you can get it, so a little bit of cleanup in that. And then I'm just going to, it's not going to be perfect, but a bit of sanding and putty, like I said, down the road. Tiny bit of super glue, I think, to fill some gaps. And it should be close enough. To start sanding. That corner is not square. And that's going to tie me up to it. Actually, you know what? I'm going to do this the other way. Instead of trying to cut the giant plastic model, I'm just going to cut the tip off that door. Put that bend back in place. That should fit significantly better. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Look at that. A little bit of liquid glue just to get the corners that are touching nice and glued in, and there we go. Look at that. That is how you make a gear door. Bit of sanding, bit of putty. You'll never even know I did that. There is quite a bit of cleanup that's got to be done back here though, and that will get done. You can see how it was painted And then the missiles were glued on over top of the paint with this super glue, epoxy, whatever it is. So I've got goops of glue and paint that's got to be cleaned up and sanded, but that's what sandpaper and time and effort are for. But yeah, that's about that. Now if I was smart, I would have traced that shape as close as I could before I glued it in, and I would have had the next piece ready to go, but I didn't. Anyways, I'm going to leave that there. We're going to get back, we'll get that other side done, and we'll move on to the next one. Looks like there's a piece of the tail broken off possibly too. I might have to make something up back there. We'll take a look at the finished kit. I've also got these exhausts that need a lot of cleanup. Some sanding and whatnot to clean them up, and I'll paint everything up in steel and glue everything back together. You can clearly see how messy that connection is. Definitely needs quite a bit of cleanup to make everything fit properly, but yeah, that's what I'm here for. So it's gonna be nice. It's gonna be cool. Like I said, I'm hoping to get some primer on this by tomorrow. Start just to shoot some basic primer, especially on this piece where there's no masking. I can just coat it in primer and then deal with the nose later and get the cockpit finished up and do that after. But I'd like to start getting some primer down and getting the shape of everything sorted out. I might even get these, you know what, I'm gonna glue this tail back together while I have it. I might even try to get these tails glued on before I glue the nose in place. Just to get whatever seams around these tails need to be cleaned up, and then it's just a simple matter of gluing that forward fuselage on when it's time. So, moving right along, it's gonna look good. So I figured it'd be time for a good, small update on the progress. Still working away on the cleanup. I feel like I'm a lot closer. I'm hoping this right here is sort of the final application of putty and sanding that I will require. I've done a coat of primer, I've been around it and taken a look. Everything looks good as I've gone through and keep checking, apply, putty, sand, repeat. For the most part, it's looking good. This will be mounted to a stand on a base, relatively low. So a lot of this belly is going to disappear and will not be seen. So I'm not terribly worried about getting the belly perfect. I'm just trying to get the worst of it cleaned up. What I really need to focus on is the areas that you will see. And for the most part, that is up in this area here, these intake sides, which have been cleaned up quite nicely. The leading edge of the wings, the seam through here on both sides, everything is nice and clean. The other big one is this area back here, where the two fuselage halves meet. The upper half was quite a bit wider than the lower half, so it was a good step on both sides. So I'm just trying to go through and hide the worst of that step. This is probably the third or fourth layer of putty that I've had to put in this area, but it was a relatively large step, and I feel like this is probably about where it needs to be to hide it. So I'm hoping that this will be it. For the rear fuselage at least, I still have a little bit of work to do on the nose section. I haven't even primed the nose section yet. I have been putting a lot of my effort into this rear section. As well, the exhausts, I'm going to do the exhaust cans themselves, the burner cans, in Alclad. I haven't primed them yet either. I'm going to prime those when I prime the nose section, the forward fuselage. I plan to paint them in Alclad in the jet exhaust. The lower section here, instead of using Alclad, which does require quite a bit of work to clean up and make it look right, I might try to use the Vallejo metallizer steel that I have. And it might be enough to get the look I'm going for, but with a little bit more ease of application. And then I will end up giving it, again, because it'll be on the bottom and mounted on a stand, and you're not going to see a lot of it as long as it looks close. So I feel if I use that Vallejo metallizer paint, which goes on relatively easy with the airbrush, and then I do a semi-gloss finish, it'll be enough to have a look without the effort that I need to put in to make it look right. Whereas the exhaust cans, I'll do jet exhaust and I'll use the Alclad gloss to finish those off. I feel like that's probably the way to go, best of both worlds, and it's also going to reduce the amount of work I need to put in to make it look right. So it is coming along. I am very happy with this progress. Timeline's still looking good. It's only the 8th or 9th of August. So time-wise, I have more than enough time to get this finished. The show in London is the 10th and 11th, and I'll be leaving probably on the 7th or 8th. So I'm still a month out. You know, that if I can get 2 or 3 days a week, a couple of hours here and there to work on this, it shouldn't take me long, especially considering for the most part, the hard part is over. I've got the puttying done, I've got the sanding done, the paint stripping is done. All I'm really left with at this point is painting and decals once I get this nose section done. That being said, I do have a couple of busy weeks coming up with work. I'm hoping I can get this finished. I really don't want to fail at this. But it is what it is. Just cleaning up these exhaust cans, trying to get a decent fit. I think if I get those painted up with Alclad, it'll look good. Still a few little things that need to be done here and there, edges that need to be cleaned up. As I said, it wasn't built as a show model to begin with, and now I'm trying to make it one. So it does require a little bit of effort to clean up some of this old glue, paint, and get it looking right. But I think I'm there. I'm a lot closer now than I was a couple of days ago, and a few days from now I'll be much better off than I am today. So I'm getting there. I mean, again, as long as it looks good from the top, I'm happy. And I think that looks good. I think that's a good fit. Once those are painted Alclad, jet exhaust, bottom gets painted steel, two-tone gray. I did make sure I actually had the decals. I was 99% I had them, and I was right. That would have been a huge F up if I had gone through and started all this work and got this far and then didn't have the decals, where it was one of those like I threw them in my cart but never actually paid for them. That would have been awkward. But anyways, there we go. We're very, very close. So this next round, this is basically finished. My next round is going to be priming these tails, priming these exhausts, and then I have to sand, which I'm going to do now. Seat was painted black, dry brushed, canopy was glued on. I did some puttying around the edges. Now I just have to sand this down and then mask the canopy and then give it a coat of primer. And the primer will be, well, I got to do a little bit of white glue in here as well, but the primer will be used as the inside color. So if you look in and see the back side of these canopy frames, the primer color gray will create that look. And other than that, it'll just be sand these, mask, coat of primer, make sure all the seams look good, and then I can go ahead and start gluing this to that and move on to the next step. That being said, I did realize, looking at the instructions for those decals, I have to remove these pitot tubes. I'm going to have to sand those down, the little mounting points, and I'll go through after, and hopefully I have some replacement pitot tubes, something close enough that I can use to replace them. I can't reuse these ones because of the way I had to just remove them. There's no easy way of getting them off. So fingers crossed I have replacement parts for that. But that's a problem for future me, not for present me. Anyways, let's go back to some time lapse. You can watch me sand this, and we'll come back as I mask the canopy. So back, I did a little bit of work offline. Not a lot, just a little bit. Mostly, well, other than painting some primer, I did get the nose glued on. The top seam actually is not that bad. The bottom seam is a bit of a mess. There's quite a bit of super glue in here when I did some accelerator to try to lock it in place. I also got to do a bit more work on some of these seams here. So I'm going to do a little bit of that right now. I'm just going to knock down this seam just quickly, just to get the worst of the high points out and get down to some bare plastic and prepare it for putty. And I'm going to start putting just a little bit of putty around this. I haven't done a lot of work along this area, just some prep work before gluing. So it does need a little bit of work here to get it to a good place, which is what I'm doing now. So as I'm doing this, we'll do a quick update on where I am. As you can see, I do have paint done. It's not a final coat per se. There's still a few little issues I need to clean up on it. Some little nicks and marks I've found. Once you get the final paint on, that clearly is not perfect. So I'm going to take the time. I'm going to go through with some fine sandpaper and a couple of these files. And I'm going to go through and knock down a lot of the issues. Anything like here along the front of the intake, there's just a little tiny bit of overlap, so putty or something that's overlapping. I'll clean that up. Alright, just things like that. There's, if I have a little bit of schmutz stuck in the paint, kind of back in here, I'll go through and just try to knock that down. Make sure that the paint is more or less smooth going forward. Again, on the belly, I'm not terribly worried. It is going to be mounted on a stand relatively low, so you're not going to see a whole lot back there. But some of the issues on the wing here where there's, just a little bit of stuff that needs to be cleaned up a little bit, knock down some of the high points. The paint, the primer acts as a bit of a leveler. This paint will act as a bit of a leveler. If you can just start to sand down the high points. When I do another coat of paint back here, there's a lot of fiber stuff in the paint. I don't know if it's dust or something that got trapped under the other coat of paint that I just missed. Some trailing edge cleanup here. All of this together, when I'm done, will just make it look that little extra step closer to looking nice. And, go for the look that I'm looking for with this. So there's something here. I think it's just some paint left over from previous layers of paint that I got to clean up. So I got to go through and just scrape off some of these high points. Like that. Nice and simple. Give it a hit with this fine sandpaper just to polish off the worst of it. That's basically it. I'm just going along making sure that, as I said, any of these high points, any of these, the roughness of the paint gets knocked off. Making sure that next final layer of paint will look good. And I mean, it's going to get a gloss coat before I do decals, and then I'm probably going to finish this in a semi-gloss. I notice under here there's a pretty big dollop of putty that I seem to have missed. But that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. Add a bit of paint, take a look, see what I need to do, go through, clean up. so here we are at another critical stage in this build. Painting's done, gloss coat's done, ready for decals. I've put the first decal in. I decided, I've never used these guys before, Warbird decals, and I've never really used decals that are this big before. I mean, just to put things in perspective, you can see the inch markings down here, and these decals are massive. This whole wing is one decal, so it's an entire wing. So you're probably looking at, you know, a 7 square inch decal. So it's not a very small decal. I've never really done anything this big, and I started playing around with this this one decal I have on the backing paper here. It's already been moistened in the water. It's basically ready to go, and it already shattered. Just trying to shift it a little tiny bit off of the back carrier film, and it's already completely shattered. So I'm not entirely sure how all of this is going to go. The carrier film itself is very, very thin, and it does not take much for it to shatter. So it's going to take a little bit of effort to get these decals transferred cleanly from the backer onto the model without doing too much damage. I might just have to look at the possibility of actually breaking the decals up into a few little pieces and transferring them that way, just in order to ensure that things get done safely. Otherwise, I don't know what I'm going to do. Like I said, this is just the first one, and it's one of the smaller ones, and I'm already running into massive issues getting it transferred, so we will see. Okay, so this is going to be the hard one. I'm trying to lay down the wing. I've got this loosened up quite a bit. I'm hoping, for the most part, it will just slide off, but who knows. So, make sure this goes on more or less something like that. That's what I didn't want to have happen. So one of the downsides to this decal, which is a little unfortunate, it's a very large decal, and I'm running into these issues where there are tons of little bubbles being formed. And because it's so large, it's cracking, it's shrinking. The decal is shrinking as the decal fluid does its job, and it's causing all of this cracking to form. I'm just going to try to go through here and pop as many bubbles as I can and just keep reapplying the decal fluid and trying to get this to settle down some more. Not ideal situation, but it is what it is. It is settling down quite nicely to this vent and whatnot. These decals are really, really good decals. It's just, it's a large decal and the air is getting trapped. It's very difficult to get it out, so I'm just going to have to try to go through and push as much as I can. Try to force as many of these bubbles out as possible. And just hope that it settles nicely. So as usual, I'm going to work and talk at the same time. As you'll see, it's pretty much done. I've got a semi-gloss coat on it. The decals are finished. Semi-gloss is on. I have the steel. As you saw, the steel's painted. I got the base done. I painted it white. This gives the option if anybody wants to write anything on the base or sign anything on the base, they can. Either that, it just looks like a nice white. Looks good with being white. So we'll go with that. Really all I have left to do is glue on the exhausts, glue on the piece here at the top that I need to repair. Tail's loose again. Glue that piece on and pull the masking. So at this point right now I'm actually going to glue the exhausts on. I'm not going to use super glue or anything. I'm just going to go through and use standard Tamiya glue. There's going to be no real force exerted on these exhausts, so I'm not terribly worried if there's any shifting or movement or anything at the end of the day. It's just a matter of making sure that they're on, which is what I'm doing. They're basically a press fit. They would stay on even without glue. I've had them on for a good part of this build and it doesn't really do anything. I am going to try to get this tail glued back on. I knocked it a while ago and popped the seam, and I thought I had it glued back in place, but apparently not. So I'm going to just add a little bit of this Tamiya extra thin into that seam, try to let it bleed in, and then I'll right to the exhausts. And then I'm just going to push on that tail. There, just like that. So there, at this point, that's pretty much the model. All I got to do is just glue it onto the base, pull the masking, and fix fix the top of the tail. So I mean, I'm in a very good place. I was very worried that I would be behind schedule on this. I really thought I wasn't going to make the timeline, but here we are. You know, 4 days early-ish. So, you know, I'll take that kind of timeline any day of the week. This is an interesting one because I got to make sure I don't peel any of the decal off. Paint. Now the cockpit isn't the best because the clear bits were built and assembled by the previous owner and I couldn't really do much to them. So I just have to live with whatever damage are to them. But I think for what it is, for something that isn't going to cost them any money, and for something that really I'm only invested with the cost of the decals, you know, I'm more than happy with it. So there. That's a 99% finished model. Right there. Okay, so come back in a bit, we'll get this glued to the base and we'll call it done.
thank you for watching, guys. And as always, if you are interested in any of the content you see, you can access my website at www.seans-aviation.com. You can see all the latest pictures of aircraft and museums and the build logs of all of my current models and past models on that site. And if you're interested in any of this content, please click the subscribe button here on YouTube to follow more. Thank you very much, and see you guys next time.